The rain was coming down in freezing sheets the night 15-year-old Chloe Sullivan found herself staring at the locked iron gates of her own home. Her mother's silhouette stood in the illuminated window, motionless, watching her daughter clutch a single black garbage bag of belongings. There was no argument, no screaming match, just the cold, metallic click of the deadbolt echoing through the storm. Chloe thought she was simply being punished for being a difficult teenager. She believed she was just an unwanted burden, finally being cast aside. She had absolutely no idea that the locked door wasn't meant to keep her out. It was meant to keep a dark, multi-generational secret buried, a secret her family would do anything to protect. The Sullivan family residence sat at the end of a long, manicured cul-de-sac in one of Connecticut's most affluent, heavily forested suburbs. It was a sprawling Georgian estate of red brick and white columns, surrounded by wrought iron fencing that looked more like the perimeter of a fortress than a family home. Inside, the atmosphere was always kept at a chilling baseline of polite silence. For 15 years, Chloe had existed as a ghost within those walls. Her mother, Beatrice Sullivan, was a woman carved from ice and old money, a prominent socialite who served on charity boards, but rarely offered a shred of charity to her own daughter. Her father, Arthur, was a corporate litigator who spent more time in Manhattan hotel rooms than he did in his own study. Then there was Harrison, Chloe's older brother, by 4 years. Harrison was the golden child, the star athlete headed for the Ivy League, the heir apparent to the Sullivan legacy. Chloe, by contrast, was the outlier. She had wild, dark hair that refused to be tamed into the neat styles her mother preferred, and an inquisitive nature that constantly grated on the household's strict demand for conformity. The evening of October 14th began like any other, but the air in the dining room felt unusually thin. Dinner was roasted pheasant and asparagus, served by the housekeeper, Maria, who kept her eyes fixed firmly on the floor. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid, her emerald-cut diamond catching the low light of the chandelier. Harrison sat across from Chloe, obsessively pushing a single piece of meat around his porcelain plate. Arthur was, as usual, delayed at the office. "You are a disruption, Chloe," Beatrice said suddenly. Her voice did not raise in volume. It simply dropped in temperature. The clinking of silverware stopped. Chloe looked up, mid-bite, her brow furrowing. "A disruption? Mom, I haven't even said anything since I sat down." "Your presence," Beatrice clarified, dabbing the corners of her mouth with a linen napkin, "is a disruption to the order of this family, to the trajectory of your brother's future, to my peace of mind." Chloe looked to Harrison for support, but her brother's eyes were squeezed shut, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the mahogany table. He looked terrified, not of Beatrice, but of something unseen, something hanging in the air between them. "I don't understand," Chloe whispered, her heart beginning to hammer a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Beatrice stood up. She smoothed the front of her tailored wool skirt. "There is nothing for you to understand. Maria has placed a heavy-duty trash bag on your bed. You have exactly 10 minutes to fill it with your clothes. Nothing else. No electronics, no books, no keepsakes, just clothes. And then you will leave." "Leave? To go where?" "Mom, it's pouring rain outside. It's 40 degrees. Chloe's voice cracked, the panic finally breaching her throat. She stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Are you sending me to boarding school? If this is about my grades, I can fix them. I promise, I'll bring my math grade up." "10 minutes, Chloe," Beatrice interrupted, turning her back. "If you are not out of this house by the time the grandfather clock in the foyer chimes 8, I will have the private security firm physically remove you from the premises." The absolute lack of emotion in her mother's voice paralyzed Chloe. She ran upstairs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her bedroom, usually her sanctuary, felt like a trap. The black plastic bag lay flat on her pristine white duvet. With trembling hands, she began shoving things inside. Thick sweaters, a pair of durable jeans, wool socks, her heaviest winter coat. She didn't pack for a sleepover. Instinct told her she was packing for survival. As she reached for a framed photograph of her and Harrison taken when they were younger, Beatrice's voice echoed in her mind. No keepsakes. She left it on the nightstand. At 7:55 p.m., Chloe walked down the sweeping grand staircase. Her mother was waiting by the massive oak front door. Harrison was nowhere to be seen. "Hand over your phone," Beatrice demanded, holding out an open palm. Chloe pulled her smartphone from her pocket and placed it into her mother's hand. The screen lit up, displaying a text message from a friend about homework, before Beatrice powered it down completely. Beatrice opened the front door. The wind howled, driving the freezing rain onto the marble threshold. "Mom, please," Chloe begged, the tears finally spilling over, mixing with the cold air. "I'm 15. Where am I supposed to go? Please don't do this." Beatrice looked at her daughter. For a brief, microscopic second, something flickered in the older woman's eyes. It wasn't pity, it was fear. "If you want to live, Chloe, you will walk out that door, and you will never, ever come back. Do not contact us. Do not tell anyone who you are." Before Chloe could process the bizarre phrasing, she was pushed forward. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind her. The deadbolt engaged with a final, heavy thud. Chloe stood on the porch for 10 minutes, sobbing, banging her fists against the wood until her knuckles bled. But the house remained silent and dark, save for the single light in the living room where Beatrice stood, watching her. Realizing she had no choice, Chloe slung the black bag over her shoulder and began the half-mile walk down the winding gravel driveway. By the time she reached the wrought iron security gates, she was soaked to the bone, her teeth chattering violently. She slipped through the pedestrian turnstile just as the automated system locked it down for the night. She was alone. She had no money, no phone, no identification, and no idea how to navigate the world. The affluent streets of Oakwood Estates offered no sidewalks, only deep shadows and the occasional passing headlights of luxury cars whose drivers would never notice a soaked teenager trudging through the mud. That night, Chloe slept huddled inside a plastic children's slide at a public park 3 miles from her home, clutching her bag to her chest, shivering violently as the reality of her new existence settled into her bones. She was homeless. She was abandoned. But she was alive. The first 3 weeks were a masterclass in human invisibility. Chloe learned very quickly that society is designed to look through people who don't belong. She had managed to hitchhike out of Connecticut, catching a ride with an older woman driving a delivery truck who took pity on her and dropped her off on the outskirts of Boston. The city was a sprawling labyrinth of concrete, noise, and indifference. The grandeur of her past life vanished, replaced by the grim realities of survival. She learned to wash her face in the sinks of public libraries, to time her visits to fast food restaurants, to scavenge half-eaten meals left on tables, and to sleep with one eye open in the darkest corners of subway stations. Her clothes, once designer, were now stained and permanently damp. Her dark hair was matted. The physical toll was brutal, but the psychological toll was worse. Every night, she replayed the moment of her eviction. "If you want to live, Chloe, you will walk out that door." The words haunted her. They didn't sound like the words of a frustrated parent dealing with a rebellious teen. They sounded like a threat. But from who? Beatrice? By her 4th week on the streets, the weather turned bitter, bringing the threat of early snow. Desperation drove her to a youth shelter in the South End, a dilapidated brick building run by an exhausted but kind-hearted man named Sullivan, a cruel irony that wasn't lost on Chloe, though everyone just called him Sully. "First time?" a voice asked. Chloe jumped, clutching her garbage bag, which she had since double-bagged to prevent tears tightly to her chest. Sitting on a cot across from hers was a boy who looked to be about 17. He was painfully thin, wearing a faded green army jacket with sharp, observant eyes. "Yeah," Chloe muttered, looking down at her scuffed boots. "I'm Leo," he said, offering a half-smile. "Rule number 1, in here, keep your shoes on when you sleep, or you won't have them in the morning. Rule number 2, don't trust the clam chowder." Despite herself, Chloe let out a small breath that resembled a laugh. Over the next few days, Leo became her unofficial guide to the city's underbelly. He taught her which soup kitchens served actual protein, which alleys were safe to cut through, and how to spot undercover cops. But Leo was also hypervigilant, a trait born from years of dodging the foster care system. It was Leo who noticed them first. They were sitting on a park bench near the Boston Common, sharing a stale bagel Leo had charmed out of a bakery worker. The sky was a bruised purple, the streetlights flickering to life. "Don't look directly at it," Leo murmured, his jaw barely moving, but look at the reflection in the puddle by the trash can. Across the street, Chloe shifted her gaze downward. Reflected in the murky water was the imposing grille of a black Lincoln Navigator. It was idling in a loading zone, its windows heavily tinted. "It's just a car, Leo," Chloe whispered, her breath misting in the cold air. "It's the same car that was idling outside the shelter yesterday morning," Leo corrected her, his tone dead serious. "And the same one parked near the library when we went to use the bathrooms on Tuesday. Someone is watching us. Or, more likely, someone is watching you. You don't exactly have the standard runaway vibe, kid. You carry yourself like you used to have money." Chloe's blood ran cold. "If you want to live, I need to check my things," Chloe said, standing up abruptly. Panic was a cold serpent coiling in her stomach. They hurried back to the shelter, keeping to the narrowest streets and ducking through crowded pedestrian areas. Once they were safely in the corner of the chaotic dormitory, Chloe dumped the contents of her garbage bag onto her cot. Sweaters, jeans, a few pairs of socks, nothing out of the ordinary. "What are we looking for?" Leo asked, keeping an eye on the door. "I don't know," Chloe admitted, frustrated. "My mother packed this bag." "Well, she forced me to pack it, but she watched me do it. There has to be a reason she let me take these specific things." She began feeling the garments, pressing her fingers against the seams of her thick winter coat, squeezing the heels of her spare boots. Nothing. Then she picked up her heaviest item, a thick, oversized wool sweater her grandmother had supposedly knit for her years ago. She rarely wore it because it was scratchy and awkwardly heavy. As she squeezed the thick collar, her fingers brushed against something hard. It didn't bend like fabric. It felt rigid, rectangular, and utterly unnatural. "Leo, give me your pocket knife," Chloe breathed, her heart hammering wildly. Leo hesitated, then handed over a small, worn Swiss Army knife. Carefully, so as not to draw the attention of the other kids in the shelter, Chloe sliced a tiny opening in the seam of the heavy wool collar. She dug 2 fingers inside the thick yarn and pulled. Out slid a small, sealed, waterproof plastic pouch. Chloe and Leo stared at it. Inside the clear plastic, there was a heavy, ornate silver key with the number 804 stamped into the bow. Beside the key was a single, folded piece of thick parchment paper. With shaking hands, Chloe tore open the plastic and unfolded the document. It was a birth certificate, but it made no sense. The seal at the top belonged to the state of New York, not Connecticut. The date of birth listed was exactly 1 year before Chloe's actual birthday, but it was the names that made the air rush from her lungs. Mother, Abigail Montgomery. Father, unknown. Child, Charlotte Montgomery. "Who the hell is Charlotte Montgomery?" Leo whispered, leaning in close. "I don't know," Chloe said, her voice barely audible over the din of the shelter. But she pointed to the bottom corner of the certificate. There, pressed in faded black ink, was a tiny infant's footprint, and right next to it, attached with a small staple, was a modern, clear photograph of a thumbprint. Chloe looked at her own right thumb, where a distinct, crescent-shaped scar slashed through the whorls of her fingerprint, a scar she got from a glass accident when she was 7 years old. The thumbprint in the photograph had the exact same crescent scar. "That's my fingerprint," Chloe said, the room spinning around her. "Leo, this is me, but my parents are Beatrice and Arthur Sullivan. I've lived with them my whole life. I have pictures from when I was a baby." Leo looked from the document to Chloe, his street-hardened face pale. "Chloe, rich people don't just kick their kids to the curb for having an attitude. And they definitely don't sew fake identities and safety deposit box keys into their clothes." Before Chloe could respond, the heavy metal doors of the shelter groaned open. The usual chatter of the room abruptly died down. Chloe looked up. Standing in the doorway, scanning the room of homeless teenagers with cold, calculating eyes, were 2 men in expensive, dark, tailored suits. They didn't look like social workers, they looked like predators. And as one of them locked eyes with Chloe, she realized with terrifying clarity that her mother hadn't thrown her away because she was unloved. Her mother had thrown her away because someone was hunting her. The air in the shelter, evaporated. The two men in the doorway didn't move frantically. They moved with the terrifying, synchronized precision of predators who knew the exits were already covered. "Sully," Leo hissed, his fingers digging into Chloe's forearm like iron clamps. "Look at Sully." The shelter manager, a burly man who had spent 30 years surviving the rougher edges of Boston, had instinctively stepped between the suits and the main floor. "Can I help you, gentlemen? Visiting hours are over. If you're looking to make a donation, the office opens at 9 tomorrow." The taller of the two men, whose neck was thicker than a utility pole, didn't even look at Sully. His eyes were scanning the cots, row by row, sweeping left to right, moving closer to where Chloe and Leo sat frozen. "We're looking for a runaway," the second man said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp that carried easily over the sudden silence of the room. He reached into his breast pocket and produced a photograph. 15 years old, dark hair, goes by the name Chloe. Chloe's breath hitched. She shoved the birth certificate, the key, and the thumbprint photo back into the plastic pouch and shoved it deep into her jeans pocket. Sully glanced at the photo, then his eyes flicked imperceptibly toward the back of the room right at Chloe. He looked back at the men. "Don't know her. We get 50 kids a night. They all look the same when they're freezing. Let's take a walk through, just to be sure," the tall man said, taking a step forward. Sully shifted his weight, blocking the aisle. "You got a warrant, pal? Because otherwise, you're trespassing in a city-funded sanctuary, and I've got the Boston PD's precinct captain on speed dial." That was all the distraction Leo needed. He yanked Chloe backward, off the cot, dragging her toward the heavy, swinging doors of the industrial kitchen. "Stay low. Do not make a sound," he commanded in a whisper. They scrambled on hands and knees through the chaotic labyrinth of sleeping teenagers, ducking beneath tables and cots. Behind them, the sound of a scuffle broke out a heavy thud, followed by Sully shouting, "Hey, you put your hands on me again and I'll break your jaw." Leo kicked open the kitchen door, pulling Chloe through. The kitchen was dark, smelling of stale grease and bleach. They sprinted past the massive stainless steel sinks toward the fire exit. Leo hit the crash bar, and the heavy metal door swung open, blasting them with freezing rain and the stench of the alleyway dumpsters. "Run," Leo ordered. They tore down the alley, their boots splashing through freezing puddles. Chloe's lungs burned, the heavy wool sweater weighing her down, but adrenaline fueled her legs. They didn't stop running until they had woven through 6 blocks of narrow side streets and ducked into the subterranean entrance of the Chinatown MBTA station. Leaning against the tiled wall, Chloe slid to the floor, gasping for air. Who were they? "Fixers," Leo said grimly, peeking over the turnstiles to watch the street entrance. "Corporate security, private military, whatever you want to call them. Those weren't cops, Chloe. Cops don't look at kids like they're collateral damage. Those guys were sent to clean up a mess." Chloe pulled the plastic pouch from her pocket, staring at the ornate silver key. The number 804 gleamed under the harsh fluorescent subway lights. "If they're looking for me, it has to be because of this. Because of who Charlotte Montgomery is." Leo knelt beside her, taking the key. He squinted at the bow, turning it over to examine the intricate metalwork. "There's an engraving here, tiny, G, H, and Sons, Wall Street." He looked up, his street-smart eyes wide. "Wall Street, New York. This isn't a locker key for a bus station, Chloe. This is a private vault key for an old money bank in Manhattan." "New York," Chloe repeated. A terrifying puzzle was beginning to piece itself together. Her father, Arthur Sullivan, spent 5 days a week in Manhattan. His law firm, Sterling, Vance, and Sullivan, represented billionaires, hedge funds, and pharmaceutical giants. "If your dad is hunting you," Leo said, voicing her darkest fear, "then Boston is burned. They'll have eyes on the bus stations, the trains, everything. So, how do we get to New York?" Leo managed a tight, crooked smile. "We don't take the bus, we take the ghost train." At 3:00 a.m., deep in the freight yards of Worcester, Leo boosted Chloe into the open door of a southbound CSX freight car hauling lumber. It was illegal, dangerous, and freezing, but it was completely off the grid. As the train sangle patut forward, Beginning its slow, rhythmic clanking down the eastern seaboard, Chloe huddled against the stacks of pine, sharing the thin warmth of Leo's army jacket. For the first time since the deadbolt clicked shut, she began to understand her mother's final words. If you want to live, do not tell anyone who you are. Beatrice Sullivan hadn't been punishing her. Beatrice, trapped in her own gilded cage with a ruthless man, had known the fixers were coming. Kicking her out with nothing but a trash bag wasn't an act of cruelty. It was the only way to make Chloe disappear before Arthur's men could orchestrate a tragic accident at home. The heavy wool sweater was a Trojan horse, hiding the only weapon Chloe had, the truth. The freight train slowed to a grinding halt in a rail yard in the Bronx, just as the sun began to bleed over the Manhattan skyline. Chloe and Leo slipped out of the lumber car, covered in sawdust and grease, shivering violently in the brisk November air. Navigating the subway system down to Midtown, the sensory overload of New York City threatened to crush Chloe. The towering skyscrapers of glass and steel felt like prison bars. Every man in a dark overcoat made her heart race. "We have a problem," Leo said as they emerged onto Lexington Avenue, blending into the morning commuter rush. "You're looking for a private bank, G.H. and Sons usually implies something like Garrison Holdings. Institutions like that don't let street kids walk through the front door. We look like we've been sleeping in a dumpster." Chloe caught her reflection in the mirrored glass of a storefront. She was horrifyingly pale, her dark hair tangled into knots, her face streaked with dirt and soot. Her heavy coat was stained. She didn't look like a Sullivan, and she certainly didn't look like an heiress named Charlotte Montgomery. "We need a bathroom, a hairbrush, and a thrift store," Chloe decided, a sudden, unfamiliar, steely resolve crystallizing in her chest. She was done crying. She was done running blind. Using the last $20 Leo had hidden in his shoe, they found a massive Salvation Army store near 34th Street. Chloe scrubbed her face and arms in the public restroom until her skin was raw. She brushed out her hair, twisting it into a sleek, severe bun, the exact style her mother, Beatrice, had always worn. She traded her filthy winter coat for a second-hand camel-colored trench coat that, while a bit large, mimicked the quiet luxury of the Upper East Side. She kept the heavy wool sweater hidden in her black bag, which Leo agreed to hold down the street. At 10:15 a.m., Chloe stood alone before the imposing bronze doors of Garrison Holdings and Trust on Broad Street. The building was a temple of old money, with towering Corinthian columns and zero signage. She took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of Beatrice Sullivan's icy entitlement, and pushed the heavy door open. The interior was silent, lined with dark mahogany and green marble. There were no teller windows, just antique wooden desks spaced far apart. A security guard in a tailored suit immediately stepped into her path, his eyes sweeping over her ill-fitting trench coat. "Miss, I believe you have the wrong building," he said, his tone polite but absolute. Chloe didn't flinch. She stood perfectly straight, raising her chin just a fraction. "I am here to access box 804. If you attempt to turn me away, I will have my trust officer terminate this branch's management of the account by noon." The guard hesitated. The sheer arrogance of her tone was authentic. It was a perfect mimicry of Arthur Sullivan dressing down a valet. An older man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses looked up from a desk nearby. He approached slowly. "I am Mr. Sterling, the vault manager. You seem a bit young to be a primary box holder, miss." "Charlotte Montgomery," Chloe said. Her voice didn't shake. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the ornate silver key, and placed it on the mahogany desk with a dull clink. Alongside it, she placed the New York State birth certificate. Mr. Sterling's polite smile vanished. He stared at the name on the certificate, then at the key, and finally up at Chloe's face. He looked as though he had seen a ghost. "Miss Montgomery," he whispered, his voice suddenly stripped of all customer service veneer. We were instructed that this account was permanently sealed. Your father." "My father is listed as unknown on that document," Chloe cut in sharply, pointing to the paper. "And the instructions on an unvested legacy account are irrelevant to the primary beneficiary holding the physical key. I want access to the vault. Now." Sterling swallowed hard. "Of course, There is, however, a biometric security measure attached to the Montgomery accounts, standard procedure for our legacy clients. He opened a brass box on his desk, revealing a small, modern digital fingerprint scanner, a jarring piece of technology in the antique room. Right thumb, please. Chloe's heart slammed against her ribs. She thought of the tiny photograph stapled to the birth certificate, the crescent-shaped scar. She pressed her right thumb against the illuminated glass. A blue light swept over her skin. A computer screen on Sterling's desk chimed with a soft, green, approved notification. Sterling exhaled a shaky breath. Right this way, Miss Montgomery. He led her down a spiral marble staircase into the belly of the building. The air grew cold and smelled of ozone and aged paper. They approached a massive circular steel vault door, which was already propped open. Inside, thousands of polished steel rectangular doors lined the walls. Sterling used a master key, then gestured for Chloe to insert hers. They turned them simultaneously. The heavy door of box 804 popped open. Sterling stepped back, giving her privacy, though his eyes never left her. Chloe pulled the long steel metal tray from the wall and carried it to a velvet-lined viewing table. She lifted the lid. There was no gold. There were no diamonds. There were, however, banded stacks of $100 bills, at least $200,000 in cash. Beside the money lay a dark blue United States passport, issued to Charlotte Montgomery, with a photograph of Chloe, taken from afar, walking home from school just last year. But it was the item resting at the bottom of the box that made Chloe's blood turn to ice. It was a thick, leather-bound journal. The name, Abigail Montgomery, was embossed in gold on the cover. Resting on top of the journal was a folded letter, addressed simply, "To my daughter." Chloe broke the wax seal and unfolded the heavy parchment. The handwriting was frantic, slanted, and desperate. "My dearest Charlotte, if you are reading this, it means I am dead, and Beatrice kept her promise. You must understand that the man you call your father, Arthur Sullivan, is a monster. He is not your father. He was my corporate attorney. When I discovered that Arthur was using his firm to launder millions of dollars in stolen assets from my family's pharmaceutical company, I threatened to go to the authorities. Arthur didn't just ruin me. He ordered my execution. Beatrice, his wife, found out. She is complicit in his crimes, but she could not stomach the murder of a child. She struck a deal with Arthur. If he let you live, she would raise you as her own, hiding you in plain sight under the name Chloe Sullivan, ensuring you would never access the Montgomery Trust, which vests on your 16th birthday. Tomorrow, you turn 16. Tomorrow, you become the legal owner of the Montgomery estate and a legal threat to Arthur. He will not let you survive the day. Take the money. Take the passport. Run, my beautiful girl. Run, and never look back." Chloe dropped the letter, her hands shaking violently. The dates clicked into place. Today was October 15th. Tomorrow was her birthday. Her mother Beatrice hadn't thrown her out to punish her. She had thrown her out on the eve of her 16th birthday because she knew Arthur's men were coming to the house that night to permanently tie up a 15-year-old loose end. Beatrice had packed the key, the proof, and the escape route into the seams of a sweater, playing the role of the cold, dismissive mother to convince the household staff and Arthur that she was just kicking out a rebellious teen. Suddenly, the heavy steel door to the vault room echoed with a loud, metallic clang. Chloe spun around. "Mr." Sterling was no longer standing by the entrance. In his place stood the tall, broad-shouldered man in the dark suit from the Boston shelter. He held a suppressed pistol at his side. "Hello, Charlotte," the fixer said, stepping into the vault, his boots echoing on the marble floor. "Arthur sends his regards. Happy early birthday." The silence inside the subterranean vault was absolute, amplifying the metallic click of the suppressor being screwed onto the barrel of the fixer's handgun. The man didn't move with frantic urgency. He had the cold, methodical posture of a butcher stepping up to a familiar block. He raised the weapon, aiming squarely at Chloe's chest. "Arthur said you were a smart girl," the man rasped, taking a slow step forward. "Smart enough to find the key. Smart enough to make it to Manhattan. It's a shame you weren't smart enough to just take the cash and disappear to Europe." Chloe's mind raced, her thoughts moving at a frantic, terrifying speed. Her eyes darted from the gun to the man's polished leather shoes, and finally to the heavy, solid steel tray of box 804 resting on the velvet table. For 15 years, she had been trained by Beatrice Sullivan to show no emotion, to swallow her panic, to remain perfectly composed under intense pressure. She had always thought it was emotional abuse. Now, as she stared down the barrel of a gun, she realized it was combat training. "If I disappear to Europe," Chloe said, her voice dropping an octave, perfectly mirroring Beatrice's icy, aristocratic drawl, "Arthur will just send someone like you to find me. The trust vests tomorrow. It's worth hundreds of millions. He won't let that go." The man smiled, a cruel, thin line. "You're right, he wouldn't. Nothing personal, kid." As his finger tightened on the trigger, Chloe grabbed the edge of the velvet-lined table and flipped it upward with every ounce of strength her terrified, adrenaline-fueled body possessed. The heavy steel tray of box 804 launched into the air. Stacks of $100 bills exploded outward like green confetti. The heavy brass corner of the tray caught the fixer square in the wrist, just as the gun discharged. PFFT crack. The suppressed gunshot sounded like a violent whip crack, but the bullet tore into the green marble ceiling instead of Chloe's chest, showering the floor with pulverized stone. The man grunted in pain, stumbling backward as the heavy tray crashed to the floor. Chloe didn't freeze. She lunged forward, scrambling on her hands and knees through the scattered fortune. She grabbed the dark blue passport, shoved it into her trench coat pocket, snatched the leather-bound journal, and blindly grabbed 2 thick stacks of cash. She didn't care about the rest of the money. The journal was her life. The journal was the weapon. "You little," the man snarled, recovering his grip on the weapon. Chloe spun and hurled a heavy, marble bookend from a nearby display desk directly at his face. It grazed his shoulder, but it gave her the split second she needed. She bolted past him, sprinting up the spiral marble staircase. Her boots slipped wildly on the polished stone, but terror propelled her upward. She burst onto the main banking floor. Mr. Sterling, the vault manager, was cowering beneath his antique mahogany desk, his hands clamped over his ears. The bank's silent alarm had clearly been tripped. Heavy steel shutters were beginning to slowly descend over the massive street-facing windows. Chloe didn't run for the front door. The guard there was already drawing his weapon, looking confused. Instead, she sprinted toward the rear of the bank, smashing through a frosted glass door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." She tore down a narrow hallway, hit the push bar of the fire exit, and burst out into a narrow, damp alleyway, smelling of rotting garbage and exhaust fumes. She collided hard with a solid figure standing by the dumpsters. "Hey, easy!" It was Leo. He grabbed her shoulders, steadying her. His eyes widened as he saw the wild, hunted look on her face, and the journal clutched desperately to her chest. "They're here," Chloe gasped, her lungs burning. Arthur's men. They were waiting in the vault. Leo didn't ask questions. He grabbed her hand. "Move!" They sprinted out of the alley just as the heavy metal fire door banged open behind them. They merged violently into the chaotic lunchtime crowd of Wall Street. Men in tailored suits, tourists snapping photos of the New York Stock Exchange, and hot dog vendors created a dense, moving forest of bodies. Chloe and Leo kept their heads down, weaving aggressively through the mass of humanity. They ducked into the Bowling Green subway station, leaped over the turnstiles, and squeezed into a crowded 4 train just as the doors chimed shut. As the train violently lurched forward, plunging them into the dark tunnels beneath Manhattan, Chloe collapsed into an empty plastic seat. She was trembling so violently her teeth rattled. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in white marble dust and someone else's blood. They didn't stop moving until they reached a dilapidated, cash-only motel in the deepest, most industrial part of Queens, sitting in the shadow of the humming power lines near Astoria. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and bleach. The wallpaper was peeling in yellowed strips. It was perfect. Leo locked the deadbolt, wedged a cheap wooden chair under the doorknob, and pulled the blackout curtains tightly shut. Chloe sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, the leather-bound journal resting heavily in her lap. The embossed gold letters, Abigail Montgomery, seemed to mock her. She took a breath, opened to the first page, and began to read. For 3 hours, the only sound in the room was the roar of passing airplanes overhead and the soft rustle of aged parchment turning. The story Abigail had written was a terrifying descent into corporate nightmare and betrayal. Abigail Montgomery had inherited her family's pharmaceutical empire, Montgomery Biotech, when she was 22. Naive and overwhelmed, she had trusted the company's aggressive, charismatic outside counsel, Arthur Sullivan. Over 5 years, Arthur systematically created offshore shell companies, dozens of them, nested inside each other like Russian dolls. He funneled hundreds of millions of dollars out of the company's R&D division and into private accounts. When Abigail finally hired a forensic accountant and discovered the massive hemorrhage of funds, she confronted Arthur. She documented everything in the journal: account numbers in Zurich, routing codes for the Cayman Islands, the names of the corrupted politicians and federal judges Arthur had bribed to keep the SEC looking the other way. But the final entries were the ones that broke Chloe. October 2nd. I am pregnant. I haven't told Arthur yet that I know about the missing funds. I was going to the FBI tomorrow, but tonight I found his private security file. He has photos of me, my home, my routines. He knows I know. I fear for my life. But more than that, I fear for the life growing inside me. December 14th. My beautiful Charlotte is born, but the joy is ashes. Arthur came to the hospital. He whispered in my ear while the nurses were out of the room. He told me that if I go to the authorities, neither me nor my baby will survive the week. His wife, Beatrice, cannot have children. She is desperate for a daughter. He told me he is taking Charlotte to give to Beatrice as a gift to smooth over their own failing marriage and to ensure my permanent silence. He told me he will arrange my suicide by the end of the month. Tears streamed down Chloe's face, splashing onto the ink. The woman she thought was her mother was a willing participant in the theft of her life. Beatrice, desperate for a child and trapped in a loveless, terrifying marriage with a sociopath, had accepted a stolen baby. She had raised the child of the woman her husband murdered. She knew, Chloe whispered, her voice hollow. Beatrice knew exactly who I was. That's why she never loved me. Every time she looked at me, she saw Abigail. She saw the murder she helped cover up. Leo sat on the floor, his back against the wall, listening as Chloe summarized the horrors in the book. His street-hardened exterior cracked, revealing deep, genuine sympathy. But why throw you out now? Why not just keep pretending? Because of the trust, Chloe said, flipping to the final page of the journal. Attached to the back cover was a legal summary. Abigail's father was paranoid. He set up an ironclad, unalterable trust for his grandchildren. It bypasses the parents entirely. Tomorrow, on my 16th birthday, the Montgomery Estate Trust officially vests. I legally inherit the controlling shares of the company and the remaining billions. She looked up at Leo, her eyes hardening. If I'm alive and I claim it, Arthur loses control of the company. He bled dry. He loses his power, his money, everything. He couldn't just have me killed in his own house without drawing suspicion. So he pressured Beatrice. They planned to kick me out so I would be a runaway. Then, his fixers could find me in a dark alley in Boston or New York, stage a mugging gone wrong, and Arthur's hands would be perfectly clean. Beatrice played along, but she packed the key and the birth certificate in the sweater. She gave me a fighting chance. Leo ran a hand over his face. Okay, this is massive. This isn't just a rich guy being a jerk. This is federal-level crime. RICO, wire fraud, murder for hire. We need to go to the cops. We can't just walk into a precinct, Chloe argued, clutching the book. Arthur is a billionaire litigator. He plays golf with police commissioners. The journal says he has judges in his pocket. If we walk into a random police station, the desk sergeant will flag my name, Arthur will get a phone call, and we'll be dead in a holding cell before morning. Then who? Leo asked, his voice rising in frustration. We can't fight a billionaire by ourselves, Chloe. He has an army of guys with guns. Chloe stared at a name written in the margins of the journal. A note Abigail had scribbled frantically. If I fail, find Richard Cordray, Southern District of New York. He is the only prosecutor Arthur fears. He is clean, Not a cop, Chloe said slowly. A dangerous new energy filling the dingy motel room? A prosecutor? We're going to the federal courthouse in Manhattan. We're going to the SDNY. But we aren't going to sneak in through the back door. Arthur expects a scared runaway, hiding in the shadows. She stood up, slipping the oversized trench coat back on, and looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror above the dresser. The terrified, lost 15-year-old girl, who had been thrown out into the freezing rain, was gone. In her place stood Charlotte Montgomery, the rightful heir to an empire, armed with the one thing Arthur Sullivan couldn't afford: the truth. "We don't hide anymore, Leo," she said, turning to him, her eyes blazing with a cold, terrifying resolve. "We walk right through the front door of the federal building in broad daylight. Let his fixers try to shoot me on the steps of the courthouse in front of 100 witnesses. We're going to burn his empire to the ground." The morning of October 16th dawned crisp and blindingly bright, casting sharp shadows across the concrete canyons of Lower Manhattan. Chloe, now fiercely embracing the name Charlotte, woke up on her 16th birthday, not to a chorus of song or a candle-lit cake, but to the deafening roar of a garbage truck outside their dingy motel window. It was the best birthday she had ever had. Today, she possessed the power to destroy the man who had stolen her life. By 8:30 a.m., Charlotte and Leo were ascending the subway stairs at Foley Square. Ahead of them loomed the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse, a towering monolith of white marble and granite columns. It was a fortress of federal law. But Arthur Sullivan had not built a billion-dollar empire by underestimating his enemies. As they stepped onto the sprawling plaza, Leo suddenly grabbed Charlotte's arm, jerking her to a halt behind a hot dog vendor's cart. "Don't move," he hissed, his eyes locked on the perimeter of the courthouse. Parked illegally in the plaza's loading zone was a black Lincoln Navigator. Leaning against the hood, casually reading a newspaper, was the tall fixer from the bank vault. His right wrist was bound in a thick, white brace, a souvenir from the heavy steel tray. Two other men in identical dark suits were stationed near the eastern and western staircases. They had cordoned off the building. "He knew," Charlotte whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Arthur read my mother's journal too. He knew she documented Cordray's name. He anticipated we would come here." "We can't go back, Charlotte," Leo said, his voice tight. "If we run now, they'll just hunt us down in the streets. We have to get through those doors." Charlotte looked at the tall fixer. He was reaching into his jacket, his eyes scanning the morning commuter crowd. If they made a run for the steps, the men would intercept them long before they reached the federal marshals stationed at the metal detectors. They needed a distraction, a massive one. Charlotte reached into her oversized trench coat and pulled out the two thick stacks of $100 bills she had grabbed from box 804. It was $20,000 in pure, untraceable cash. "Leo," she said, her voice eerily calm, "when I say go, you run for the revolving doors. Do not stop for anything." Before Leo could protest, Charlotte stepped out from behind the vendor's cart and walked directly into the center of the bustling, crowded plaza. She didn't run. She walked with the deliberate, aristocratic posture of a billionaire's daughter. The tall fixer spotted her instantly. He dropped his newspaper, speaking rapidly into a small microphone on his lapel, and began pushing through the crowd toward her, his hand slipping beneath his suit jacket. Charlotte waited until he was 50 feet away. Then, she ripped the paper bands off the bricks of cash. With a violent, sweeping motion, she hurled handfuls of crisp $100 bills high into the swirling morning wind. "Free money!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "Take it!" For a split second, the plaza stood still. Then, a single bill fluttered onto the briefcase of a Wall Street analyst. He grabbed it. The spell broke. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted. Dozens of commuters, tourists, and street vendors abandoned their coffees and briefcases, diving to the pavement. A tidal wave of humanity surged forward, scrambling, shouting, and clawing for the raining cash. The tall fixer was instantly swallowed by the frantic mob, elbowed in the face by an aggressive bicycle messenger, and violently shoved backward by a stockbroker diving for a cluster of bills. "Go," Charlotte shrieked. She and Leo sprinted through the periphery of the riot, flying up the sweeping marble steps of the courthouse. The federal marshals guarding the entrance had their hands on their holsters, distracted by the chaotic riot in the plaza. Charlotte slammed through the heavy revolving doors, collapsing onto the polished floor of the lobby. "I need to see Richard Cordray," she yelled, holding the leather-bound journal high in the air as the marshals rushed her. "My name is Charlotte Montgomery. I have evidence of federal wire fraud, judicial bribery, and the murder of Abigail Montgomery." 2 hours later, Charlotte and Leo sat in a heavily secured conference room deep within the Southern District of New York. Richard Cordray, a fiercely sharp prosecutor with silver hair and tired eyes, sat across from them, slowly turning the pages of the journal. Next to him lay the birth certificate and the digital scan of Charlotte's thumbprint, matched against hospital records his team had frantically pulled from the archives. Cordray closed the journal. The silence in the room was deafening. "Arthur Sullivan has slipped through my fingers for 10 years, Cordray said softly, looking at Charlotte with profound respect. He insulated himself perfectly, but he couldn't insulate himself from the past. This journal, your biometric match to the Montgomery Trust, and the offshore routing numbers detailed in these pages. It's the Holy Grail, Charlotte. I want him arrested today," Charlotte stated, her voice possessing a steely authority that made even the veteran prosecutor sit up straighter. "Before he realizes I made it inside." At 2:00 p.m. that afternoon, a fleet of black SUVs carrying 24 armed FBI agents breached the wrought iron gates of the Sullivan estate in Connecticut. Arthur Sullivan was arrested on the 18th hole of his private country club, his golf club clattering to the immaculate grass as federal agents forced him to the ground. Beatrice Sullivan was found sitting in the formal dining room, perfectly dressed, waiting. She offered no resistance. When agents searched her bedroom, they found a single letter addressed to Charlotte, apologizing for her cowardice and confessing her full complicity in the cover-up. Beatrice had chosen the gilded cage over the truth, and now the cage was turning to rust. A month later, the media storm finally began to settle. The revelation of the Montgomery biotech scandal shook Wall Street to its core. Arthur Sullivan was denied bail, facing life in a federal penitentiary. The fixers were rounded up. On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, Charlotte stood in the glass-walled boardroom of Montgomery Biotech's Manhattan headquarters, looking out over the sprawling city skyline. She was no longer wearing a damp, oversized sweater or a thrift store trench coat. She wore a tailored suit. The rightful CEO and majority shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar empire, having legally assumed control of her vestment. The heavy oak door opened, and Leo walked in, wearing a sharp new suit of his own, though he still wore his scuffed combat boots. Charlotte had named him her personal head of security and chief of staff, the only person in the world she truly trusted. "The board is ready for you, Miss Montgomery," Leo said, a familiar, crooked smile playing on his lips. Charlotte turned away from the window, the crescent scar on her thumb catching the afternoon light. She had been thrown away like garbage in the freezing rain, but the fire they had tried to extinguish had instead forged her into steel. "Let's go," she said. If you were captivated by Charlotte's incredible journey from a discarded, homeless teenager to a powerful heiress reclaiming her stolen empire, please hit that like button right now. Stories of resilience, justice, and exposing dark family secrets are what we do best here. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single thrilling upload. We want to hear from you. What would you have done if you found that key hidden in your sweater? Would you have run, or would you have fought back? Drop your thoughts in the comments section below. We read every single one. If you know someone who loves a massive plot twist and a satisfying revenge story, share this video with them. Your support allows us to keep bringing you these intense, real-life dramas. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next incredible story.